address, source IP, destination IP inside the layer 3 header, and you don't know every time who that user is behind that IP address. So in case if there is any kind of intrusion event which has occurred, or any malware event which has occurred for that particular session, then how do I know who that user is? I would have to look up again some different database to identify or to look at the IP to user mapping to understand that who that user is, and then go ahead and start troubleshooting on its endpoint. But with identity-based policy on firewall, most of the vendors are trying to give you that view inside the firewall itself that for this IP address, this the user is. So that is one of the objective of using identity policy to map IP to user mappings for all the connections. The second objective of user identity based policies is to go ahead and do access control based on users or groups. Okay, which means that I have to give permission to certain type of applications or certain type of URLs or certain type of session connection. I want to go ahead and leverage that information which I already am authenticating against some external identity sources, and then use that information in Firepower to create policies against the users and groups. Okay, so I want a Bob from my HR group to access certain job portals because he's working against recruitment. So I want to give him only access to job portals. Whereas Alice, she's from marketing team, she might not need access to job portals, but she needs access to social networking sites. Then in that case, I would be able to go ahead and create policies based on HR group, marketing group, or Bob or Alice, depending on who they want to give access to. Okay, so in order for the identity to be resolved by a firewall, there are some agents which are implemented. So we will look at how it is done. So most of the vendors does it two ways. One is called as an active authentication, and second one is called as passive authentication. Let me put it in the next slide, that would be easy. So active authentication and passive authentication. So active authentication would be nothing but I am forcefully asking the user to authenticate, which means that in active authentication, I'm giving him a portal, a page where the user has to enter his username and password. Okay, and then my Firepower would try to check against either LDAP. So either I have open LDAP server configured running on Linux, or if I have AD server set up. So my Firepower is checking with those servers to verify whether this username and this password is correct, verify that this user has which group, and then accordingly go ahead and look at in the policy whether this user has permission or not. Okay, so active authentication is where forcefully the user has to first authenticate, and then post that he would get access to the network. Passive authentication is where I'm trying to resolve the IP mappings, okay, user to IP mappings. Okay, so this mappings, user to IP mappings, is going ahead and getting resolved through an agent, which means that there is an agent which is running. We will see what are the different options of the agent which are available in Firepower, but each vendor has its own way of doing this, but they refer this the same thing, which is passive authentication, because passively you are trying to resolve the identity. User is not aware that he is getting authenticated or his identity is getting checked. It is passively done through a help of an agent in order to get that IP to user mapping. In Firepower, we only support AD in order to go ahead and do that. So the only database which you can get that IP to user mapping is from AD server. Okay. Now with passive authentication, the agents which are possible to go ahead and get that IP to user mappings are either ICE, or there is a application which you installed on any Windows based system, which is called as UIA. Okay, so user identity agent. So this UIA agent is installed on Windows based system. Whereas in case if you already have ICE, then you can integrate your firepower with ICE using Pxgrid. And with Pxgrid, you will be able to get IP to user mappings from ICE. Okay, which is the better option to use in case if you are using passive authentication or active authentication, which is the best way? Passive authentication is better if you already have AD. If you have existing AD running in your network and you want to go ahead and get that same authentication information which my user is already doing with domain controller, then I can retrieve that information with the help of passive authentication. In case if I don't have AD and I'm or the user or the service which that particular server is using is not connected with AD because it's a server, then probably I might think of doing active authentication where forcefully the user will get to a portal page. Okay. If it is passive authentication, which one to choose? Is ICE better or is UIA better? Now that also completely depends whether you have ICE in your network. If you have ICE in your network and you are comfortable in using Pxgrid, then you might want to use ICE. Also, because ICE gives you authentication for wired wireless VPN, he has more information than AD. Because if you're using UIA, then you are only going to talk to AD server, not to any other form of authentication servers. But if it is ICE, ICE might have been integrated with AD, ICE might be integrated with guest portal, ICE might be integrated with your WLC controller. Hence, you will get more information about the IP to user mappings which are there in your network. But yes, from a configuration perspective, ICE integration with Pxgrid is a little complicated, plus it relies on certificate, which means that you need to have a good understanding of digital certificate in order to complete the configuration of ICE with firepower using Pxgrid. Okay, whereas UIA is very simple to do integration. It's simply to install that agent and integrate it with firepower. Slowly, Cisco is moving away from UIA because they are focusing more towards ICE and they are trying to recommend to use ICE with Pxgrid. Okay, questions?
Yesterday, when you showed that in network discovery, FTD was able, FMC was able to detect two Windows systems in your network. So how it was doing? Is it was it using any user agent or SNMP tool,
No,
anything?
no, nothing. It was used based on the traffic which was passed, which means that whenever any traffic is going through the firepower, firepower is building the profile using the logs.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay, it's only the logs, nothing else.
That means that network discovery has nothing to do with user detection, user this.
See, it can do users, but when it comes to which users, those are those passive users. Passive users means this one, user discovery. Passive users means that username is scrapped from the traffic. What does it mean? It means that, for example, you are logging into Gmail,
Okay.
right? So at that time, because that authentication is getting through the firepower, is able to know who that user is on that Gmail portal or any kind of other third-party portals which you are authenticating. So it's scrapping, it's removing the username information from the flow of the traffic, which is going through the fiber. It's not using any agent in order to do that. So that's a passive user discovery, which is done by network discovery. Okay?
Okay.
But it's very rare you will be able to discover till the time you are using HTTP or if you are using SSL decryption in order to, because the firepower has to see that user authentication happening in order for it to retrieve the user information.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
but yes, network discovery can do that, but that is only for passing through traffic. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Arab sir, I
One
have a
more.
question.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between LDAP and AD? I think it is the same term.
No, LDAP is a protocol which is used by AD in order
Hmm.
to go ahead and do the authentication. Okay. Uh, when we say LDAP over here, we are talking about Open LDAP, which means that Open LDAP server which is installed on Linux.
Okay.
Whereas LDAP is a protocol which is used by AD in order to do the authentication.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Any other question? Okay, so let's understand how this passive authentication works. Okay. So first, active is very easy because active is simply a portal retrieving from firepower, right? But for passive, because there are a lot of moving parts, it's a little difficult from someone who is new with identity-based policy to understand how passive works. But people who have worked with other vendor implementation, it is similar. It's just that who that agent is, whether it is ICE or whether it is uh, uh, your agent software, which UI agent software, which you have installed on the Windows machine. Okay, but the concept is same pretty much in every vendor. So let's go ahead and understand how this passive authentication works. So in order to go ahead and do passive authentication, there are a lot of configuration. You have 4 steps of configuration which you need to do in order to go ahead and build your identity-based policy. The first step is you have to make sure that you decide on the agent and you set up that agent. Now this agent, as I said, can be ICE, and we're talking about ICE means you need to use Pxgrid. Okay. Uh, if it is not ICE, then you would have to do it with a application UIA, which needs to be installed on any Windows based system. Okay, so you need to make sure that whether it is ICE or UI, you have successfully configured that agent, and we will see how the configuration is done. In this particular lab, I will show you ICE with Pxgrid, how it is set up. But I have slides for UI. I can't show you both. So either I can show you UI or either I can show you ICE. So I would show you ICE. Definitely the steps are longer, and probably if you might feel that I might not want to go with ICE because there is a lot of complication from a configuration perspective. But I would prefer to use ICE because if I already have an ICE in my network and my ICE is just already running a lot of other things in it, like doing authentication of my guests, doing authentication of my wireless users, or doing authentication of my wired users, then I would probably want to use that same information and give it to firepower. But if you feel that yes, ICE is not an option for me because I have very limited scope of deployment of ICE in my network, then I might go for UI. Okay, so it all complete depends on your choice what you want to do it, but we will go with ICE in our lab. So you set up the agent. So once the agent is set up, you, depending on what you want to do it, you will accordingly go ahead and do it. Next, after setting up the agent part or resolving what would be the agent you'll be using, the next thing you will be doing is setting up something called as a REAM. Now, what is this REAM? Is nothing but you need your firepower to be integrated with AD to retrieve the group information, which are called as group mappings. Okay, which means that which all groups are there in your AD, so that I can use those group information in my policy. So in order for you to create your policies based on groups, you need to know the groups in first hand. So how do I retrieve those groups? To retrieve those groups, you're doing REAM configuration. Okay, so REAM will help you to fetch whatever groups are there in your AD into your firepower. All right. Any questions on this REAM? Now, once the REAM is set up, the next thing you do is you configure your identity policy, which means that you set up in your identity policy, how do you want to do authentication? Whether you want to do authentication for a user with active method, whether you want to do it with passive method, or whether you don't want to authenticate someone for some network or some URLs when he's accessing, or certain application when he's accessing, then I can set up identity policy. Okay, so this has to be defined, that do I want to do and what way of authentication I want to do for a particular portion of my network. Clear? Once you have that identity policy configured, the next thing you do is you configure your access control policy. You assign that identity policy to your access control policy, and now you create certain rules in your access control policy based on groups, based on users, for whatever permission they want. Okay, so once you have done all these configuration of 4 steps, then your network is ready to learn about the user. So how does he learn about the user once you have done all the 4 configuration? So before I begin with the configuration, the process, is there any question on the configuration of identity, the 4 steps which I discussed?
So here user agent will be installed in the client, means say I have client Windows XP, Windows 7, whatever it is. The user agent will be installed in the client, and REAM will be configured on the FMC itself.
Yes, all these 3 are FMC policies.
Okay.
Right, and the agent is not installed on all client, agent is installed on one of the Windows machine.
Means on which the AD will be.
You can do that you can install it with AD, or if you want, you can have a member server PC, and then you can install it over there.
Okay.
Okay, so it's up to you. How do you want to do it? In some organization, the Windows team does not want to install anything on domain controllers because of compliance, so they might prefer to use a separate member system to do that.
So this agent will fetch information from the domain controller.
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
When we are doing the process, we'll talk about it, how it is done, but yes, it will fetch the information from the domain controller. Correct. Okay, so let's say that we are going with the agent-based approach. So since we'll be looking at the ICE approach practically, I will talk about the agent-based approach. But again, process remains the same, concept remains the same. So let's say that there is an agent which is installed on AD, right? So we have installed this UIA agent on the AD server itself. And when you're installing that agent, you have told that agent to poll the AD at some regular interval of 1 second. So every 1 second, the agent would poll to AD to retrieve who has logged in, who has logged off. Okay, so retrieve the logon information, log off information, or in short, retrieve the IP to user mappings. that for any IP address, who is the user. How is AD knowing about it? AD is knowing about it because your PCs are part of domain and they are authenticating as soon as they log in into the AD server. Okay, so whenever you're logging in inside the domain controller already knows that this is the user who has logged in. Okay, clear? So AD is already maintaining this information in its security events, that for which who is the what is the IP address and what is the user. So you're just fetching that information from by the agent, whether it is ICE or whether it is UI. So once, let's say a user Bob logs in. So that is a user. In AD Bob, and Bob is part of a group HR. Okay. There is Bob's PC, which is 192.168.1.1, his IP address. So when Bob is logging in, AD knows about it, that Bob is connected to IP 192.168.1.1, and he's giving that information to the agent because of the regular polling which is happening between the agent and the AD. Now, once that IP to user mapping has come, the agent is then giving that information to FMC, because again, they are polling with each other, they're connected with each other. So that IP to user mapping gets traveled down to FMC. Now, inside FMC, you might have created a policy saying that Bob should be given access because he's part of the HR group. He should be given access to Facebook, right? Now, this information is getting traveled from FMC because you are deploying the policy that Bob should be given access to Facebook. We are deploying that policy based on access control to the device, the managed device. When the traffic is coming, it's coming with some source IP and going to some destination IP. The source IP address is 192.168.1.1, and the destination IP could be of Facebook, whatever. When the traffic is coming, it's looking at, okay, because I have identity-based policy which is configured, and that identity policy tells me that for a subnet which is in VLAN Corp, I need to resolve based on active authentication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and now check that this IP address, who is the user. Do I have the IP to user mapping from FMC? And I have that IP to user mapping that for this IP address, the user is Bob. Then I'm checking what is the group information of Bob based on the group mapping, which I have retrieved by REAM. So Bob is part of the group HR. And have I given permission in my access control that HR should access Facebook? Yes, which means that I have to allow this traffic. Okay, so in this overall complete thing, the most important thing is how that IP to user mapping gets traveled down to the firepower managed device. Because at the end, it could be FMC who is talking with the agents, but at the end, the managed device is the one who is actually doing traffic restriction or access control when the traffic is moving through the device. So somehow that IP to user mapping should finally reach to the managed device. Okay. Any questions on this? Yes, any questions? All right, so let's proceed. So this is showing you how the agent is set up. You can see that the agent has very limited scope for installation on the PC. So you can install it any of these operating systems. 2016 is not added as yet, server 2016 or 2019. Okay, so probably they are planning to discontinue this agent and only focus on ICE. But yeah, you would have to download the agent from the Cisco's website, software.cisco.com, deploy it on any of the machine, like how you deploy a normal Windows application. And then you would have to configure certain things. So there are different tabs which are there inside the agent. So the most important tab is this and this. These two tabs is where you will be doing different configuration, and definitely the general tab to start the service. Okay, so in the second tab, you would be defining all your domain controllers. So you'll be specifying all your domain controllers. So if I have 10 domain controllers, because you don't know which user can connect to which domain controller, you are going to specify all 10 of them. And you would be specifying the user who has permission to connect to that AD. This user should be part of the domain admin group in your AD. So this service account should be member of domain admin. Okay, and then once you specify the user name and password, and if he's part of the domain admin group, then he will be able to retrieve the IP to user mapping. So inside Windows, there is a service called as WMI. So he would get access to that service, WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation is the name of that service. Okay, so you specify all your domain controllers over here. If you want to change the polling time, you can change the polling time. By default, it is 1 minute. You can change it to 1 second, 30 seconds, depending on what you want. So configuration is very straightforward in the agent, provided you have the right permission. And then you would be getting log on information, log off information when the user logged in, when the user logged off. Plus, the second thing you do is you would have to tell your agent who your FMC is, and you have to tell your FMC who your agent is. So that is done from the FMC side in systems, integration, and identity sources. Once you click on identity sources, you have two options, either ICE or either agent. You can't use both, only one. So you go with agent. Click on new agent and you specify the IP address of that particular agent. Okay, just the IP address. There's no password based authentication, nothing, just IP address. Then you go to the agent and you specify who your FMC is by clicking on the third tab, FMC. And that's how they will be able to talk to each other. So the agent configuration is very straightforward. But you will see that when we start doing ICE integration, because it's using Pxgrid, and for Pxgrid, you require certificate-based authentication. The process is lengthy, and the process requires little knowledge of ICE and digital certificate.
So this user agent application, that will be provided by the FMC only, or we have to download it separately from
You
some
have to
website?
download it from software.cisco.com, from Cisco's website. Yes, it's not a built-in application on Cisco.
One question I popped up in my mind. This is out of topic from this topic. May I?
No, ask me please.
You see, in ASA, the AnyConnect VPN package we used to upload on ASA. So on FMC also we are uploading the AnyConnect image.
Yeah, for VPN configuration, yes.
Okay.
So we will
Okay.
see that tomorrow. As I said on day one, that I will be showing you the steps of how the configuration is done, but I will not be able to do it. I will not be able to test it, but I can show you the step of how it is done. It's pretty much the same. Whatever you were doing in the ASA front, now you will be doing in FMC. So I'll show you the moving parts of the configuration, how it is done for remote access VPN. Okay, but site-to-site VPN will be able to test it, but remote access VPN will not be able to test it. I will be able to show you how the configuration is done.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. All right. Any question? Any other questions? Okay. So the next, once we, the next one is how to go ahead and do it with ICE integration with Pxgrid. So let's go ahead and look at that practically. Again, the step is very lengthy. So please be with me because it will take a lot of time for me to set it up from a configuration perspective, because it's a very lengthy process which is there. So let's jump on to our lab and let's see how the configuration is done with Pxgrid. Okay, so in our lab we have our ICE server and we have our FMC. We have been set up. We have already been enabled with our FMC. We've been using FMC. ICE is set up with its IP address, but so far there is no configuration of Pxgrid which is done on ICE. Okay. So if you have ICE, what ICE needs to do is, in order for it to connect to AD and retrieve that IP to user mapping, there is a service called as passive ID, which needs to be configured. Okay, so the service passive ID is what is going to help ICE to retrieve the IP to user mappings via WMR. Okay, so we will first set up passive ID in ICE. The second step is going to be, we will set up Pxgrid. Let me write it down. So the first step will be set up, let's say, ICE FMC Pxgrid integration. So step number one is going to be passive ID setup in ICE. Okay. Step number two is Pxgrid setup in ICE. Okay, it's only setup. When we say setup, it means certificate, because ICE and FMC will be authenticating each other via certificate. So you need to get a proper certificate from your CA server who both ICE and FMC will trust. All right. So certificate is going to be installed in ICE. Step number three is FMC setup. Pxgrid setup in FMC. So Pxgrid setup in FMC, which is CERT. Okay, so both this process of setup is going to be via a common CA, which both of them will trust. Okay. Fourth is going to be in FMC, not in ICE, but in FMC, let's say calling ICE for Pxgrid authentication. Okay, which means that you are going to tell FMC to connect to your ICE and authenticate for Pxgrid. It will not be vice versa. You will not go to ICE and tell connect to FMC. No, you will say from FMC connect to ICE and authenticate. Okay, once this fourth step is done, your Pxgrid will be up. This is just Pxgrid configuration, what we have seen, not REAM configuration, not identity policy configuration, not access control policy configuration, only REAM, only Pxgrid configuration. You can see from a steps perspective, it is more compared to user agent, where you simply have to install the user agent and put in the required credential to retrieve the IP to user mapping, and go ahead and tell who your FMC is, and then in FMC tell who your agent is. That's it. Okay, but with Pxgrid, it's more steps. So let's start with the first step of passive ID setup. So I'm going to go in my eyes. Okay, and then I'm going to go into administration tab, external identity sources, and I'm going to tell my eyes who my AD server is. Okay, so that's step number one. So I'm going to connect to my AD server. I'm going to say AD secure-x. Some. So I'm telling my eyes to join the AD domain. So I'm entering the permission, the credential, which is the domain admin credential. Okay, who has the permission to join ICE. Right now, the next step is I'm going to go into passive ID, and I'm going to go ahead and enable passive ID. So I'm going to add all my domain controllers. So when I click on add DC, it will automatically connect to AD, and it will show me all the domain controllers. So I don't have to manually add it. If I have 50 domain controllers, it will show up all of them. So then I will select which domain controller I need to talk to. Again, this steps I'm doing little fast when it comes to ICE, because this is something which is what we teach when we do ICE training. But yeah, since few of you might not know, hence I'm going ahead and showing you the steps. Typically for ICE part, we already do it, we configure it. Okay. And then once you go ahead and add your domain controllers, you will say configure WMI. So what you're doing is you're telling ICE to go ahead and configure the domain WMI service. What happened? This is 123. Let me test if it was successful. Okay, that's it. Great. So this was successful. So the configuration of WMI is done. Okay. So what we have done right now is, if I go to my employee PC and if I log in, my eyes should start seeing the user information. Okay. Which means that, for example, right now I go to, let's say I restart my PC and I will log in with the user Bob, okay, who is part of my AD. So in my AD, I have a user. I have a user called as Bob, right? So this Bob user is part of the group HR. Okay, so I want to see when I log in with Bob, does my eyes see that authentication with AD? Because of because of passive ID being set up. Okay, so let me type Bob's password. You can see Bob is logged in now, or trying to log in. So Bob has logged in. Bob sends its authentic. So Bob has logged in on his PC, and Bob has authenticated with the domain controller. So AD knows the IP and the user mapping. Now, because we have enabled passive ID, this IP to user mapping is now available in ICE, or should be available in ICE. Okay, and when we will set up Pxgrid between FMC and ICE, this IP to user mapping should come in FMC also. Okay, so let's go to our ICE and see if ICE can see that login. So if I go into operations and in ICE, you'll see live sessions. I should see a session of I had to reduce some timer. 1 minute. One configuration of Pxgrid timer. Timer is very big, 15 minutes. I want to reduce it to shorter time. So let me, so if I go into the advanced settings, the timer is 10 minutes, right? So I want to reduce it to something like 1 minute. So it's quickly, it gets that information. So I don't want to wait for 10 minutes. So I might want to change this timer to get that information as quickly as possible. Okay, that's fine. It's dynamic. So let me
Password pass at the rate 123.
Cisco at 123. C capital.
Okay.
Okay, so you can see now sales one has logged in. It's showing sales one. So make sure that timer you reduce it in ICE because it will take a lot of time or to get that information. So it's always good to keep it to 1 minute so that whenever a new login log off comes in, it quickly gets that information. So sales one, it's showing. So now let's say if sales one logs off and Bob's logs in, same thing will happen. So it will keep happening whenever a new user will log in. ICE would know because there is Pxgrid, sorry, passive ID, which is enabled. Okay, so now we want that this information should be passed to my FMC. Okay, so in order to do that, I need to set up Pxgrid between them. So we have completed with the first step. Now we are going to set up the Pxgrid on ICE and then Pxgrid on FMC. All right, so stay with me. Don't get lost because you have a lot of steps. So in order to do that, I will go into administration, certificates, and then I need to generate a CSR, right? So that I have to sign the certificate of my ICE and certificate of my FMC with a same CA, which both of them trust. Okay, that's how the authentication is going to happen. So I'll click on the CSR and the certificate will be used would be for Pxgrid, and I'm going to select my ICE node, and over here I'll quickly say Pxgrid and country India. That's it. Rest other things I'm not going to fill in my certificate, or I'll keep it as default. I'll click on generate and it will generate a CSR for me. Okay, so CSR is generated. I will download that CSR and I will get it signed by my enterprise CA. And the certificate template will be Pxgrid. Submit it, download. Okay, so this is the certificate which has been signed. So if you go into if I show you the certificate, so the certificate is signed by my enterprise CA. Yes, it is signed by my enterprise CA for ICE. Now this certificate, I need to upload it in ICE. So I'll go back to that CSR, click on bind certificate, and then I'll choose the certificate for Pxgrid. Okay, so now I have uploaded a certificate which will be used and signed by my enterprise CA, which my FMC will also trust. Okay, so far this process, so whatever I'm doing, have you understood? Any questions on any of the any process what I have done? Please ask.
Many questions. Many questions.
Yeah.
So, see, first of all, you went to ICE server. Okay. Then you created a certificate, certificate so that Pxgrid could connect to this. Is it?
Uh, no, the reason we generate certificates so that Pxgrid can authenticate uh, with, so both of them does authentication based on certificate. So I
Okay.
will be giving my certificate, he will be giving his certificate, and because both the certificates are going to be signed by the same CA,
Okay.
which they trust, the authentication will be successful.
Mm.
So
So,
the way of
but
authentication between both the parties is done through certificate, not any kind of username and password or anything.
so currently you have generated only one certificate that is from the ICE.
For
ICE.
ICE, for
Okay.
ICE.
Now you will go to FMC also, and then again you will generate a certificate, or
I'll have
uh,
to do that because currently the certificate what I have generated is only issued to ICE,
okay.
not to FMC, right?
Mm.
The certificate
The
which I
certificate
generated,
which we generated yesterday, can we use that certificate also, or we will have to generate a separate certificate?
no, that certificate was, if you remember, yesterday we selected whenever I'm generating certificate, the most important thing is what type of certificate is. So yesterday I generated a subordinate certificate,
Okay.
which was used for signing other certificates. Today I'm going to generate a certificate which will be for Pxgrid.
Okay.
Okay, so each certificate has a different purpose.
Okay.
So the yesterday's certificate was only going to be used for signing other certificates because that's a subordinate level of certificate which is there.
Hmm.
Today's certificate is going to be an identity certificate for Pxgrid.
Okay.
Okay? It's a different certificate which we'll have to generate, not the same
Okay.
one. Okay, any other questions?
No, from my side, okay.
All right, so now let's go to our FMC. Now, in order to do this third step, it is the third step is going to be like CSR for the generating is going to be not done through GUI. You have to use the CLI in order to do that, which means that I would have to access the CLI and then I would have to go ahead and generate the certificate signing request. I cannot do it from the GUI, how I did it yesterday. Okay, because the GUI does not have that option for Pxgrid in order for it to get the certificate generated. So the command to do this is, let me show you. Let me just get the command. So I will log in into my FMC. Oh, not 101, sorry. Again, I've given this command in the presentation, so you don't have to by heart it anything. But yeah, this is the command which is there. So the command for generating the CSR is going to be sudo su sudo open SSL generate RSA. So I'll explain to you the command first. Let me just type it in. Okay, so what I'm saying is this. OpenSSL is the library for generating a RSA key pair. And when you generate the RSA key pair, I want the keys to be named as pxgrid.key. So this is the name of your keys. And this is the size of your key. All right. So you will give this command in order to generate a key pair for your certificates, private key and the public key. But when you're generating it through CSR, you don't have to do that. Why? Because automatically a private and public key is created. But because we don't have the option of generating CSR for Pxgrid in FMC, we have to do it through CLI. All right. You can also use any Linux machine which has OpenSSL library to do this. It is not that it has to be done through CLI of FMC, but it's best to do it because I don't need to install anything. Because by default, Linux has OpenSSL installed in its library. And because FMC is based on Linux, it's already available for us. If you look at LS, you can see that I have my private and public key pair available. Now what do? Is I use again OpenSSL and I'm requesting for a CSR using the key pair, and the name of the CSR is going to be this. Okay, so what I did, I generate a key pair, then I'm telling to use that key pair and generate a CSR. Oh, I forgot one option. New request. New. It's a new request which I'm making. Okay. Yeah. So you can see that it's asking me all those questions which would have been asked if I would have done it through some kind of a GUI. State, I don't want. Locality name, I don't want. Organization name. Organization unit. Common name. Email address I don't want, right? So now I have two files. One is a private key pair and one is the CSR. Okay, so these two commands will help me to do that. So this command helps me to, the first command which helps me to generate the CSR, generate the key pair. The second command will help me to take that key pair and generate a CSR. Okay, now these two files I need to download from my FMC. So I would have to use some kind of a SCP client like WinSCP or even FileZilla. When I'm connecting through port 22, I will be able to do that. So I'll connect to my FMC, but I will use port 22. Okay, not the default port 21 or 20. And I'll download these two files. And I'll download it in documents folder. Okay, once these two files are downloaded, you can close this connection because you don't need it anymore. You would have to go and take a look at this file. So the CSR1 is what we need right now. I'll copy the CSR. I'll go to my AD again. paste that CSR and use the template Pxgrid and submit it. So it will generate a certificate. If I open this certificate, you can see that it is the same certificate what was there before, just that this is going to be generated for FMC. For Pxgrid. Okay, by the same CA. Right now, I'll take this and upload it inside my FMC. I would have not been able to do it directly from FMC because I don't have an option of CSR as yet in the FMC. So hence I had to do it from the CLI and then I upload it in the FMC. So I go in my object management. Under PKI, and internal certs. I'll click on add internal cert and I would say Pxgrid. And over here, I'll add the certificate which I downloaded from AD, and this is where I will add the key. So the certificate data was this, and the key was in the documents. So both has to be added. The certificate which has been signed plus the private key, which was generated from CLI. Okay. So this would complete the third step of the certificate part in the Pxgrid. Any questions?
Perhaps my question is to key pair.
Please.
So we are using one CSR and one key for authentication, right?
No. We are using a key pair to generate. So whenever you generate a CSR from GUI, what happens is automatically a key pair is generated. A private and public key is generated. Okay. See,
Right.
so this command is going to be doing that. It's generating a key pair, right? And then because I have a key pair, I need to generate a CSR. So how does, see, you need to understand digital certificate in this. Like, let's say if I have a CA, and let's say I have Bob as a user, right? Now Bob wants a certificate. If I want a certificate, what do? I generate a CSR, right? So when I'm doing that, I'm automatically creating a private key and public key. Why? Because that is what I need to get my digital certificate. So when I say I'm generating a digital certificate or I have a digital certificate, what it means is I have a private and public key. What was the purpose of a digital certificate? Why do I need a digital certificate? Can anyone explain to me?
For authentication.
For authentication, right? Like for example, if I and Alice, if I and Alice wants to talk to each other and share some file, for example, let's say, so there is Bob and there is Alice. Bob has a data. Bob wants to send that data to Alice, right? Now, if Bob wants to send that data to Alice with encryption, what are the different options Bob has?
Through a key, through a certificate.
The options are either to use symmetrical algorithms like DAS, triple DAS, AES, right? But with symmetrical, it means that I have to have the same key. So key which is used by Bob for encryption will be the same key which will be used by Alice for decryption. So which means that Bob needs to send that key somehow to Alice in a secure manner, which Bob does not know how to do that, so that he does not want to compromise. So the second option is to use asymmetrical. If you're using asymmetrical algorithms like AES, DSA, sorry, not AES, RSA, DSA, Eclipse curve, all these algorithms, then in that case, I would have two keys, private key and public key. Same thing, Alice would have private key and public key, right? I'm asking from Alice his public key or her public key. Why? So that I can encrypt the data and send it to Alice. And only Alice can decrypt it. Why? Because only Alice has private key. Okay, so whatever is encrypted with one key can only be decrypted with other key. But what is the problem over here? The problem is, how do I know that the public key which I'm getting is of Alice? Is there any authentication which is happening to that public key? Yes, no, maybe. Is there any authentication which is happening to that public key?
No, not yet.
No, right? Which means that I need to have some kind of an authentication which I have to do to make sure that the public key which I'm asking or getting from the other side is genuine. So what do? I take help of a digital certificate. Now, when I'm taking help of a digital certificate, I need to generate a certificate. So in order to generate a certificate, both either Alice or Bob is going to go ahead and generate a CSR. Now, when I'm generating a CSR, that CSR has the public key of Alice. So it takes, so when you generate any CSR, what do is you fill in certain details for that CSR, like subject name, common name, all those other things. Plus you're putting your public key and you're sending that to the CA, right? What is a CA going to do? CA takes that CSR plus the public key, which is there, takes the public key, which is of yours, puts it into a hash algorithm, and what comes out? If you put anything in the hash algorithm, what comes out? If you put anything in the hashing algorithm like MD5, SHA, what comes out?
A number like,
A hash code, fingerprint,
vertical.
right? A hash code, a fingerprint,
Yeah.
anything.
Yes. Yes.
So what do you do with that hash code? What does a CA does with that hash code? Because it's a public key and that is the hash of that public key, he takes his private key and he encrypts it. What is this called? This is called as digital signature. This digital signature is signed by who? By the CA's private key. Okay, you take that digital signature and along with other attributes which you have requested and you build a certificate. And you give that certificate to Alice, saying that this is your certificate, whoever requests your public key, give you this certificate, which I have signed it. Sign means what? That digital signature. I have authenticated your public key. I have made sure that this public key is valid for you. Right? So hence we have to we had to generate that too, so that we generate a key pair and then take the public key with our CSR and give it to our CA so that he can digitally sign that particular public key of ours. Clear? So again, as I said yesterday also, digital signature, digital certificate is a very important concept nowadays. So you need to make sure that it is clear. What all things are happening, where it is happening, anything, everything should be understood. Okay, so any questions on this, Vikrant? So why we generate a key pair and then we are taking that key pair and putting it into our CSR so that we can get it signed by our CA. Okay, if you look at the certificate, any certificate actually, you will always see the public key in that certificate and a digital signature for that public key. So if you look at the details, you will see public key. Yeah, this is your public key, right? And for this public key, there would be a hash. So you can see signing algorithms. These are the signing algorithms which are used, and then there would be an hash which would be there. Fingerprint. All right. Okay, any questions? Can I continue? Okay, so these are the 3 steps which we have completed. The 4th is going to be now, once both of them have their respective certificates, the 4th one will be where we are enabling Pxgrid. So in ICE, Pxgrid service only needs to be enabled. So you need to make sure that the Pxgrid service is enabled. If you go inside administration, Pxgrid services, you should see that it is connected. Yeah, over here. So it should show you this message, right? And under settings, you need to make sure that you select this option, which means automatically consider approval. You don't have to wait for administrator approval for allowing a particular Pxgrid connection, or else it will wait for your approval. Now I'll go inside my FMC and I'll go inside systems, integration, identity sources, and I will see 2 options, either ICE or either agent. So I'm selecting ICE. I'm putting the IP address of the ICE, which is 10.10.2.101. 101. I'm selecting the Pxgrid CA who has signed the certificate. So yesterday we have already uploaded our CA certificate. So we'll be selecting that CA certificate over here. Yeah. Same thing we will be selecting over here, our CA certificate. And we'll be selecting our FMC Pxgrid certificate, which we just uploaded. Right? So the only thing is IP address, and rest everything is certificates. Once this is done, we can do a test to make sure that the authentication and certificates, everything is proper. If it is proper, it should give you a log, a success. What would be the things which might create a failure? Pxgrid troubleshooting is not very easy because it does not give you a very clear errors. But if things have been properly done, then it will show you success. But what would be the reason where it would fail? Time is one factor. If the time between FMC and ICE is not correct, it could be a problem. Second is DNS records needs to be set up. ICE and FMC both needs to have their FQDN in the DNS. Third could be certificate is not set up correctly. So it could be that these ICE certificate is not trusted by your FMC, or FMC certificate is not trusted by ICE. So you need to make sure that you have both the certificates signed by the same CA, and the CA certificate is also available in the device. So these are the only 3 reasons why things might not work for Pxgrid. But most of the times, if you've done the steps correctly and your configuration of your CA certificates and everything is proper, then it should work correctly. Okay, and once you know that test was successful, you save it. So now, if you go to ICE, you should see that FMC should be listed for connection. So you can see that this one is the test. So you'll see this test one, which is a temporary connection. It will go offline after test is completed. This one is the main one, which we had set up. So this one is going to be online, and FMC has subscribed to 6 things in ICE. Rest of the things are not important to us at this stage, but this is the most important thing: session directory. Which means that whatever live sessions ICE has seen, all those live sessions will be ported to FMC via Pxgrid. Okay, so this is how Pxgrid is set up with FMC and ICE. Any questions? So 5 steps. Yes, guys, any questions? All right. So once you have the Pxgrid set up, so once we have successfully gone ahead and done the steps, user agent, so we have just completed one piece of the puzzle, which is set up our user agent for Pxgrid. The next step we need to do is REAM, right? Which means to tell FMC these are the groups which are there in your AD. So we need to get that group mappings. So that is done in FMC. At the same place, system, integration, and you will see REAM. Click on REAM. So currently there are no REAMs which are there. Click on add REAM, and we will add our AD server. Okay, so the type is either AD or LDAP, 2 of them. So we'll say AD, and we'll add our domain controller domain, which is secure-x.local. The username, which has the permission to join AD. Password for this username. And we can test if this username which we have created is correct or not, and the password is correct or not, or does he have a permission or not. We can put the same username under directory password. Now base DN and group DN, what are they? Base DN is nothing but it tells you that in your AD, which is that location where I can see the users. Okay, so that is your base DN. Typically your base DN would be scene, which is going to be users, which is going to be your users folder and your domain name. Okay, so the same base DN, distinguished name, DN stands for distinguished name, is going to be added over here.
Or if we have a separate OU created inside, we have a users, then
you would be using this OU. So like, for example, there is an OU
Okay.
called as eyes.
Okay, so the CN would be the OU name.
Yeah. So no, it will be OU is equal to, there won't be any CN. CN means a default directory structure, but because you have created a user defined OU, then it would be starting with OU.
Okay.
Okay. But CN, it starts because it's a default folder, the default directory structure of AD. But OU is not. OU is an external folder which you are creating by user.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll say CN is equal to user, DC is equal to secure -x, comma, DC is equal to local. And then same thing for group DN. So group DN, I'm going to typically keep it throughout my domain because it could be groups in multiple folders. So I want him to search the complete AD, not a specific OU or not a specific CN. Okay, so click on OK, and this will save your REAM configuration. Now, once you save it, you still have to provide the IP address of your domain controllers. So provide all the IP addresses. And if you want, you can test the connectivity and click OK. So all the domain controllers which are there, where it could be that, or even if you have a GC, you can add GC, your global catalog. If you have one GC or multiple GCs, you might want to add all your GCs. Finally, you download the groups and user information from the AD. You can see now it's fetching the information from AD. So these are all the groups which are there in AD. So you select the groups which you want to be used by Firepower. So let's say I want to use IT. I want to create some policy for IT. I want to create some policy for admin user. I want to create some policy for HR group. I want to create some policy for sales group. So I include all the groups which I want to use with my Firepower. I can also create a schedule that every day at so and so time, this process of searching the AD will be done manually, will be done automatically, so that it always has the latest information of the groups available. Okay, and then you click on save. Once you have selected all the groups which you want to use, and you enable this REAM. By default, it is disabled. So you enable this REAM, and this button is going to help you to download the group information and user information also. So either you click on edit and then go from there, or you can also click over here. So it will get the latest information. But this is a manual task which will be done. So you can see 4 groups and 8 user has been downloaded. Okay, so step number 1 was set up the agent. Step number 2 was set up a REAM. So now we have an agent which has given us the IP, which can give us the IP to user mappings. We have a REAM which gives us the group mappings. Okay, so I have the live tracking, I have the groups which these users might be in. Now I'm creating identity policy, which will be to define how to do authentication, active or passive or no authentication. So these are the three actions which would be there. Do I want to do active authentication? Do I want to do passive authentication? Or I don't want to do any authentication. So let's see where that is done. So I go inside my policy and I would see identity policy, and I'll click on new policy, give a name. The first rule I'm going to create is that I don't want to do authentication for my AD servers, which means that any traffic which is coming from my AD or management network, there should be no authentication to be done for them. Okay, so I'm going to exclude these networks for authentication. So I'll click on add, and I would say management and DNS. So I would say any traffic coming from inside, going to outside or DMZ. And the action which I want is, you can see there are three actions. We'll talk about passive authentication in a minute. No authentication is what we want. And the networks for this no authentication would be my AD 10.10.9.150 and would be my management network. And I'll click on add. Okay, so this is simple rule where there is no authentication which is taking place. Then I'll create a new rule where I want to do authentication for my VLAN 9 users. So my corporate users, my VLAN 9 wired users, I would say that any traffic coming from inside to outside or going to DMZ, and the network is VLAN 9 real. If I want, I can say going to a specific port, or I can say going to a specific geolocation, to specific country, anything. And I want to do passive authentication. So I'll click on REAM settings and I'll select the REAM against which I want it to match, which is what I created before. So it has to be a sequence of configuration. You cannot do identity policy first, then go to REAM. You cannot do REAM first and forget about agent. It has to be a sequence. Okay, because if you do it with sequence, then you would be able to get the complete identity policy configured. All right, once you have this, you save your identity policy, and now you will assign this identity policy to your access control policy. So I'll go inside policy, access control, select the policy which you want to assign it to. And over here, yesterday we had added SSL policy globally. Same way we are going to add identity policy globally. Okay. Questions? So now we have added the policy, but still we don't have any access rules based on groups or users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating them. So let's say this rule we want, yesterday we have created to allow coining to get access, which was part of the category, which was tools and training. If I go into users, you can see now I have my REAM showing up. If I click on that REAM, I have my groups and users showing up. So I'm saying that coining can be accessed by HR, person who is from the HR team. Bad application, bad URLs, I want it to be rejected for all the users. So I can simply add everyone from the directory if I want. So this will add all the users from AD. Same thing over here. All the users from AD. Management access is fine because we are anyways excluding management network DNS. We are excluding it. DMZ is from outside, so we can't have a user. And VLAN 9 for, I'm going to say that this rule, which is going to give access to the internet, is going to be, let's say, someone from HR. Sorry, let's say someone from sales team. Okay. If I want, I can also say that HR would only have access to, let me add a rule. And I'll place this rule above rule number 7. And I will say any traffic coming from inside to outside. And I would say that job portal. Let's say I place this rule above rule number 2. Network, which is coming from VLAN 9, real. Application is HTTP or HTTPS, anything. Ports 80 and 443. The URL which I want to HR to have access, so I forgot to select HR, sorry. HR to have access is going to be career portal, job portal. Actually, there's no career, job portal. Okay, so job search websites. So any website which falls in job search category will be allowed to only HR user. Okay, so this one is here. And over here, I'm saying that I want to deny job search also, so that only HR can get access. Okay, so we have our users added in our policy. We could have made this one rule only, actually. We can also add job. In the same rule itself, we can add partner site, because it's the same rule, job portal plus coining. And I'll delete this rule. I don't want, because it's the same rule. Okay, questions? Okay, once you have created all these things, same thing, can be used with SSL also. So you have option of using now groups or users for your, even for your SSL decryption policy. So you can say that I want to do decryption if the user is this, or I don't want to do decryption if the user is from this group. So you can also create your decryption policy based on users now, because you have integrated some form of an identity with Fireball.
So currently this will do SSL decryption, right?
Yeah, because we have not used any user, so it's any kind of a user. So it's any.
Yes.
But if you want, you can also say that I want to do decryption only if the user is part of this group, or if this is a specific user, I want to do decryption, I can do that.
Okay.
Okay, so once you have created all, you deploy, and this time you can see that we have added a identity policy.